So I think we should start. Uh, for those who are here on time, we appreciate it. So I would like to begin, and I want to say on behalf of the Jewish Unity through say if I try that again, on behalf of the Jewish Unity through Diversity Institute, we are very, very happy to welcome back Rabbi Pereira today, Rabbi Professor Pereira today. We've had him speak on many different things, and today we're really honored to help him launch his book in the United States. It has been out in Spanish and Portuguese for a while. Sorry, in Portugal for a while. Um, it is, if you've seen the book itself, it actually is in English and Portuguese side by side, but I'm sure you'll explain that as well. So not only do we explore the history, but you can explore it in the original language. So I think that's the original language of the area. So I think that's an important part here, and I'm sure we're going to get more into it. I encourage you, please, to write in your questions in the chat throughout. If I need to, I will interrupt, but normally we will have time for questions at the end. So I want to say again, thank you for coming back. Rabbi Shlomo Pereira is the Director of Jewish Education of Chabad of Virginia and in Richmond. He recently retired from the College of William and Mary as a professor of economics. And we're very happy that he retired because now we get to have him more often and more in depth. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for those who are here live and those who are watching it afterwards. I will go to blank, and if you need me, I'm in the background.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so very much. It's a delight to come back and to share with the Jewish Unity through Diversity. In this case, the new book. And Drora, if there are any questions at any point in the chat, please stop me because I will not be able to see the chat while I speak.
Of course.
So this is about the book, but I'm not going to be talking about the details about the book. I'm going to be talking about what is behind the scenes when we talk about the book. And the first thing, actually, that I want to do is to convince you, maybe, that when we talk about printing and Hebrew printing, this is not a esoteric issue. It's not something that is a little bit of a niche topic. That's actually the way it sounds or the way it looks like. But the fact is that Hebrew printing was a revolution. When Hebrew printing was introduced, it was a revolution. Obviously, printing in general was a revolution, but Hebrew printing in particular was very significant. And was very significant for the Jewish people for some very obvious reasons. The first is, well, look, we are the people of the book. And what that means is that more than any other people or culture, we rely on books to not only know what to do, but why we do what we do, and to understand life, to understand who we are. Again, books are a big thing, and I don't need to convince you about that. So, of course, books are our strength. That's where we derive our strength and our information and our traditions and everything. At the same time, books, historically speaking, were also an enormous source of vulnerability. And if you think about just in the beginning of the millennia, that is pretty much the few centuries before the printing revolution, the number of times that Jewish books were destroyed. The point being that it's not only that we know that books are important for us, the people around us who don't wish as well also knew how important the books were for us. So if you think about the Crusades, when the Crusades go through Germany in the end of about the end of the 1100s, the 11th century, I mean to say, then of course they did not only kill people, they went out of the way to destroy books. And you have go fast forward, and you have a huge burning of books in Paris, actually on the Seine River, opposite to Notre Dame. Notre Dame was in the construction at the time, in the 1240, and there were like 15,000 books that were destroyed, Jewish books. Now, if you get your property stolen and destroyed, it's traumatic in any way. It's much more traumatic if you depend on them for your life, for your knowledge, for your everything. And we have to keep in mind that before the printing revolution, for example, to copy a book, an average size book, 250-page book, it would take 8 months. It takes 8 months. So if you have 15,000 books that were destroyed, now you multiply this and you see what this means in terms of the loss and how long it would take to replenish the inventory, so to speak. At the same time, with the printing press, we are talking about being able to print between 8 and 10, with the technology at the time, between 8 and 10 books of 250 pages a day. It's a paradigm shift between one book in 8 months and 8 to 10 books a day. So, of course, in our tradition, the printing was embraced very strongly, very fast as we could, and very enthusiastically. It meant availability of books. It meant also what I would call the democratization of use, because manuscripts were very expensive. And of course, early books were very expensive as well, but not nearly as expensive. And even more interesting, although we will not get to that all that much today, it allowed an enormous standardization of things like prayer and even things like the page of the Talmud that we take for granted, that maybe we think that the page of the Talmud that we have now came from Sinai. No, it did not. This page was actually designed after the invention of printing and through a very interesting evolution. Okay, so printing is not a marginal issue for us by any stretch of the imagination. And so let me very briefly tell you the beginning of printing and how that evolved. We'll see when we get to talking about the late 1400s, how things were so important and so distinguished and so much worth our attention. So we know, of course, the first printing with these technologies was in 1455. This is a technology with mobile metal printing types. And the editions usually were very small. So, for example, the Gutenberg Bible, that was the first book, there were just about 180 copies. So it's a very, very small editions. And that's true for the Hebrew books as well. And this allows me to introduce two terms that I will be using, two technical terms of this jargon that I'll be using throughout today. And the first is the term incunabula. Incunabula is the term that is used to books that were printed before the 1500s. So that's the way they are referred to, the incunabula. The other jargon term is colophon, and that is the piece of information in the books that not all of them have, but the piece of information in the incunabula that would state who actually printed the book, who the book was printed for, what was the location, what was the date, and a few other things. So it basically is the technical references for the book, incunabula and colophon. Okay, so after the printing press was invented in Germany, you would say, well, then maybe the first people to jump into the fray and start doing Hebrew printing would be in Germany as well. Well, the answer is no, it was not in Germany because of the way the German economy was organized. You may be familiar with the guilds, the Hanses and guilds. The guilds were professional organizations, and Jews were not allowed in those professional organizations, which basically means that Jews could not associate with the groups that were allowed and were in charge of doing all this printing business. So Hebrew printing did not start in Germany. Actually, it started in Italy right after. And if you look at this period of time to put things in perspective in our mind, what we are talking about, so the late 1500s, late 1400s, I mean to say, there were between Italy and then Spain and then Portugal. And those were the only three places where there were printing, Hebrew printing shops at the time, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Between the three of them, or among the three of them, there were 17 printing shops, most of them in Italy. And we know about approximately 175 incunabula that were printed. So 175 books that were printed during this period. There are more, but many were lost. So tell you a little bit, the printing starts, Hebrew printing starts in Italy. And in Italy, it starts about 5 years or so after standard Gothic. That's the way it's referred to, Gothic printing. So printing started in Subiaco in 1464 in Italy, and Hebrew printing starts in Rome a few years after, and it's immediately important to say that the Hebrew printing in Italy was brought by German Jews. German Jews brought the technology. They could not be printers in Germany, but they could be printers in Italy, so they brought the technology. And the two main families that dominated the business was the famous Sonsino family, that were from Speyer in Germany, and the Gusenhauser family that were from the city in Germany of the same name. So those were the two big houses, big printing houses. And to give you a sense of how important or not, the relative importance of Hebrew printing in Italy, in this time period, okay, we have about 11 places where there were printing, Hebrew printing, and there were about 140 Hebrew books that were produced. Now, the thing that's important here is that this is a minuscule fraction of the Italian production at the time. So Hebrew printing in Italy at the time was basically a little bit over 1% of the total, was very small. Hebrew printing in Italy was not leading anything, was just following the crowd, so to speak. Very important point. The second is when it goes to Spain, when printing goes to Spain, and of course you can ask, why did it go to Italy from Spain? I mean, you could go through France. No, well, the southern part of Italy, Naples, the kingdom of Naples and Sicily, was actually part of the crown of Aragon, the crown of Spain. So Spain was actually in Italy, so to speak, in the Italian peninsula. And so in Spain, it started in 1472, and Hebrew printing started soon thereafter, a few years after, in the city of Guadalajara. And it's important to mention that now in Spain, the printing is much more marginal, because this is a very bad period already in Iberian history. And so there are three printing shops that we know of, Guadalajara, Ijar, and Zamora. And the only thing that I will say at this point that is interesting to mention is that the Hebrew printing shop of Guadalajara, that was really the leading, the first one in Spain, was led by Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz Alevi, who was the grandfather of another rabbi exactly of the same name, Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz Alevi, that, well, in his time in Tzfat, he introduced the Lechado de prayer and a few other things in the Jewish liturgy. In particular, the Erev Shabbat, the Friday evening liturgy. Okay, now again, how important was Hebrew printing in the world of printing in Spain? Well, the number of Hebrew incunabula was about 2%, a little bit over 2%. So we are also seeing that both in Italy and in Spain, Hebrew printing was sort of marginal. And the reason why I'm stressing this is because when Hebrew printing gets to Portugal towards the end of the century, there is nothing marginal about it. Hebrew printing is leading the way of printing. So, for example, when it gets to Portugal in 1487, okay, the first book to be printed in Portugal is a Hebrew book. The first book of any type to be printed in Portugal is the Torah. the as we'll see the second book as well. But we will see that in Portugal we have three main printing shops, all of them developed by refugees from Spain. So basically what you have is, at this time period that we're talking about, towards the end of the 1400s, Portugal was the receptacle, if you want, of the best of the Jewish world, or certainly the Iberian world. That's where all the Jews from Spain that could live, that's where they settled. So at this time, that little corner of the Iberian Peninsula that was Portugal was pretty close to the center of the Jewish world for maybe a decade or so. And at this time period, just to go straight to the point, while in Italy and in Spain, Hebrew printing was like 1 or 2% of the total, in Portugal was over 60% of the total. More than half of the printing in Portugal at this time period, actually about 2/3 of it, were Hebrew printing. That's how dominant Hebrew printing. So you can say with perfect equity that Hebrew printing was the technology of printing in Portugal was introduced by Hebrew printing.
Sorry, there's a question if we know the percentage of Jews that were in these areas. So, like for example, if 1% of Italy was Hebrew printing, then what percent of the population? Do we know?
So we know quite in particular in Italy, Hebrew printing was very proportional. So the population was not much more than a couple of percent. In Spain, the Jewish population, notice this is a very complicated period, but you can say that the Jewish population before 1492 was about 7-8% of the population. But this is a period in which that 7 or 8% was already under a lot of duress. So it's understandable how the percentage is just 2% of total printing. It was already a very difficult period. In Portugal, the Jewish population after 1492 was pretty close to 20% of the population. But notice that these are not Portuguese Jews. This is Jews from Portugal and Spain that now are in Portugal. You're talking about 200,000, broadly speaking, in a population that was just a little over 1 million. So it's a massive number of Jews, not just in terms of the numbers, but also in terms of all the knowledge that they brought with them. So at that time, we cannot talk about Portuguese Jews. We should talk about the Jews that were in Portugal at the time, and they made a world of a difference in everything that was going on in that last decade, including printing. So that's, again, 20% of the population, but they probably had 90% of the knowledge, if you start thinking about scientists and physicians and things like that. Okay, so the point that I'm trying to convey to you at this here is that Hebrew printing in Portugal had a major leading role. The first book was a Hebrew book. The second book to be printed was a Hebrew book as well. The most important book to be printed in Portugal by a long shot was also in the printing shop, a Hebrew printing shop, although it was not a Hebrew book. That was the first scientific book to be ever printed in a Hebrew printing shop and in Portugal. And this book, Almanach Perpetuum by Rabbi Zacuto, that was one of the very last books to be printed Hebrew in the Hebrew printing shops that was printing in Portugal. This is one of the most influential books of the late 1400s, early 1500s in the scientific world. So this is a very, very important. So the contribution the contribution of Hebrew printing in Portugal was important from a quantitative perspective, from a qualitative perspective, and as we'll see also from a design and beauty perspective. So with all this in mind, let me just very briefly tell you that, as we sort of know, this was an extraordinarily difficult period for for Iberian Jewry. And it is a period that basically starts in 1391 with mass conversions and mass massacres, really, pogroms in Spain. And basically, 1391, that's when the 15th century starts. And from that until 1492 in Spain is just going down and down and down. And of course, we know that by 1492, it was the expulsion of the Jewish population from Spain, and many just moved next door to Portugal. So from 1492 to 1496, 97, that period of time that also coincides with the height of the Hebrew printing is a period in which the Portuguese population is there's a massive Jewish population in Portugal that are, most of them, probably, I would say, two-thirds are Spanish. Not that it made a big difference, but they are Spanish. And it so happens that if you fast forward a few years, so to 1496 and 1497, you have also the expulsion and mass conversions in Portugal, and that's the end of any organized Jewish presence in the Iberian Peninsula, period. That's the end of it. So we are talking about the end of a terrible century. And the reason why this is so important is because I don't want to focus on that. I want to tell you a little bit about how much it was accomplished. How much it was accomplished towards the end of this period, when people were under an enormous amount of duress, how much it was accomplished. That's my objective here. And the other is to tell you a little bit some of the stories behind the books and behind the people. So in all of these, the focus is very personal. The thing that is the most important for me is to try to almost feel the people, feel the books, and to get a good sense of what was going on at the time in terms of the contribution, but also how much the books and the stories behind the books can tell us about what was going on. So basically what I'm going to do now is just tell you a little bit about each of the three printing shops. And for each book, almost all of them, I give you a few stories. So I'm not going to be concerned about telling you the technical details of anything, the typographical details, which are very important, but that's not the point. I want to just share some stories and how these things relate to what was going on at the time. Okay, so the first printing shop was in Faro, which is in the southern area of Portugal, very close to the Mediterranean. And that we know of, they have 4 books that are attributed to Faro, and very likely many more, but we know the Faro Pentateuch, that is the Torah with Rashi. It was the first book to be printed in Portugal, again, 1487. But then, remarkably, they also produced several editions of the Talmud, some of the volumes of the Talmud. And we know for sure 2 of them, that is the tractate Gittim, that is about divorce, and the tractate Brachot, that's about blessings. And this is what survived. I mean, again, we are pretty confident that there are more, but this is what we know about. And then there is a very interesting, possibly a 4th book that is still under investigation, that is actually just the Targum Onkelos, meaning the Aramaic translation of the Torah. So let's just tell you a little bit about these books, about the stories behind the books. So this Faro Pentateuch is a classic because it's, well, it's the first book printed in Portugal. More importantly than that, there is only 1 copy left of this book. Just 1. That is in the British Museum in London. It's a gorgeous design with all types of decorative motifs and so forth. And the thing that is very interesting, and this is some of the stories that I want to tell, the thing that's very unique about this book is that it's actually printed in parchment, not paper. It's in parchment. And this connects very much to a debate that was going on in the beginning of printing about whether or not printed books can be a substitute for ritual purposes, for books that were manuscript. So let us say we know that the Torah scroll that is used in the synagogue, you have to write it. Yes, now we take it for granted. We don't print it. Well, at the time, they didn't take it for granted. They were arguing about it. The rabbis were arguing, okay, if we print the book, can we do it? Can we do? Okay, so we know what the answer was. But at the time, some of these, in particular the Torah, the Pentateuch, is in particular those books, very often they were printed in parchment, not on paper. Or sometimes they were printed on paper and parchment with dual editions. So that's an interesting detail that this evokes. The other is this book. It has an absolutely fascinating story. I should say that this type of stories that I'm going to tell you now, I could probably spend the rest of the week telling you all the stories that we learned. Well, the stories that the books tell us, and it's just fascinating. Well, so what is the story here? One of the things that Jews always loved to do on books is to write on the books. Okay, so today people have mixed feelings about writing on books, but historically speaking, that's where people put the notes. So, for example, if you think about what, let's say, the Talmud looks like now, well, you have the page of the Talmud, but they have lots of commentaries around. Why are they around? Because that's where people were writing notes and keep on writing notes around. So that was a natural setup. Another thing that people wrote on the books is things along the lines, this book belongs to me, or and put the name, or this book belongs to me and I sold it to somebody else. So in this incunable, in these books, there is information about who owned the books. So for example, this one, we know that in the 1600s, this book, this specific item that is in the British Museum, that is the only surviving copy of the first book ever printed in Portugal, again, a beautiful copy, very well preserved also. We know that in the 1600s, it was owned by Rabbi Nissin of Mantua from Italy, because he had put his name. There were two other Jews from Italy that owned the book in the 1600s. We know that the book in the 1600s was sold to a Hebrew book collector that was Rabbi Yosef Almanzi, and we know the book was in the collection of let's say, the estate of Yosef Almanzi until 1866, when the British Library actually bought the book from Almanzi. So one of the things that's fascinating, and I'm talking about this book, but there are lots of other cases where you have specific information about a certain chain of ownership of the specific book, the specific item. Now, why is this interesting? Why is this interesting? This is not particularly interesting in and of itself, but it's interesting because now, as we speak, in Portugal, there is a movement, let's call it that way, to claim that the British Library should return the book to Portugal. This is the first book ever printed in Portugal. It's part of Portuguese culture. And what is this story of the British having the book in their library? So these people say we want it back. And as a matter of fact, they claim that this book was stolen. This book was stolen in the year of 1596. That's the claim, 1596. We know 1596 that the British were fighting with the Spaniards. We know all of that. And Spain was in control of Portugal at the time. So the British actually invaded the southern areas of Spain and Portugal. We know that for a fact. We know that they ransacked the south of Portugal and Spain. We know that for a fact. We know that they stole lots of books. We know that for a fact as well. But we also know, because the British are very well organized. So when they went back, and a few years after, they cataloged everything, and they actually made a big donation of those stolen books to the University of Oxford, was part of the Bodleian collection, very famous British collection. So they donated. They have everything recorded, and there are no Hebrew books in the books that they stole. There are no Hebrew books. So we know immediately that it cannot be because, well, we know that in the 1600s, the book was in the possession of the Italian rabbis and then with Yosef Almanzi. We know all of that from the book. That's what it says in the book. So we know that that's not true. And we also know that if you go a little bit further, and this is where things get getting interesting in my mind, is you ask them, okay, so where did they get the book from? Because this is 100 years after the forced conversions and the expulsion. So if the British stole the book from Portugal in 1596, where did they get it from? Oh, they have an answer. The book was part of the private collection of the Bishop Mascarenhas, that was the Bishop of Algarve, and actually soon thereafter became the head of the Inquisition. So sort of my very polite reaction to these people that want the book back is to say, well, maybe somebody, first of all, it's not true that the book was stolen, because you can prove that the book had a different provenance, a different pedigree. So the claim is not correct. The book was not stolen from Portugal. But if it was stolen, and if it was stolen from the property of the Bishop Mascarenhas, that was the head of the Inquisition soon thereafter, my question is, how did he get the book? Did he purchase it from the Jews? The Jews offered him the book. So who does the book belong to? I mean, the best scenario is that if the British stole the book, then they stole from somebody that had stolen it before. So I'm not following the logic here. So the point is, yes, if you want to return the book to the legitimate owners, return it to the Jews of Portugal. That's the best I can do. Or leave it in the British Library. It's not that bad. They are taking very good care of it. Okay, so next book printed in Portugal, also with fabulous stories. And I'm already regretting that I have so little time to share you all these stories.
And even before you get into the stories, there's an interesting question, and I know that we might get off, so I want to make sure. Was there a halachic negative as to printing the books when they first came out? Because that there was something to be said. I mean, right? A Torah scroll has to be handwritten. There are things that have to be handwritten. So was there a halachic backlash to having the books printed?
Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. But that's actually a fascinating question.
Right? I thought so.
For a variety of reasons. Now, there was a debate on how we could use the books. That was a debate. But the idea of printing and the idea of making the books accessible, I mean, everybody exulted with it. It was perceived immediately as a golden opportunity. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Abraham Saba, one of the Iberian rabbis of the time, he basically writes that this is one of the miracles that was created during the period of Ben Hashmashot before Shabbat. That is one of those things that were created when God finished creating the world and was waiting for the rest. That period right before Shabbat starts. There's a big discussion in the Talmud and the Pirkei Avot about that. Anyway, it's a miracle. It's a miracle that you can produce so much with so little. So yeah, there was a wholehearted adoption of printing the books for the purpose of learning, for the purpose of using practical purposes. The idea of using the books in a ritual context, that's a different story. There was a debate, and it didn't take very long to the decision to be reached that no, you cannot use that for ritual purposes, so you're going to read it from a Torah scroll that was handwritten. Now, may I remind you, however, that the Haftorah is read from a printed book. So obviously, That's part of the debate. I mean, the Haftorah was considered, okay, not sacred enough, so to speak. It was not. It's not a Torah obligation, really, to read the Haftorah. We read the Haftorah just because, well, not just because. Historically speaking, there was a period of time. This is during the Babylonian exile and after, so long time ago, that we could not read the Torah. So the Rabbanim they chose passages of the books of the prophets and the Ketuvim, the holy writings, that matched thematically the Torah portion. And so that's why you see there is always an analogy between the Torah portion and the Haftorah. But the Haftorah we don't use, or at least in the United States, we don't use a manuscript, we use a printed book. For example, for the reading of the Megillat Esther on Purim, we do not use a printed book, right? We use a manuscript. So again, it's there are a whole array of discussions of when printed books can be used, but as a technology was accepted wholeheartedly with some caveats about what would be the realm of utilization of books. One of the reasons, and I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but one of the reasons why this is also a very fascinating question is because there was exactly the same debate in Islam. And the Islam, they ruled very differently, maybe not surprisingly. So the decision in Islam was that printing was beneath dignity for the Arabic script. And basically what that means is that the first Arabic printing houses only started on the 1700s. So it's basically 300 years after the printing and after Hebrew printing. And that, among other reasons, explains, for example, why in the Ottoman Empire, that was the center of the Muslim world for so long, in the Ottoman Empire, the Hebrew printing was completely dominant all over the place. In Israel, in the land of Israel, printing was introduced by Jews in the 1500s, was reintroduced by Jews in the 1800s. And as a matter of fact, even in that stage of the Ottoman Empire, there was such a reluctance on the part of the Muslims to use the printing that there was only one printed newspaper in Arabic that was actually in Turkish from the Ottoman authorities. It was just mostly a list of decrees and things like that. And some of the Hebrew newspapers that started in the late 1800s and early 1900s in the land of Israel, some of the Hebrew newspapers actually have a section in Arabic, which was interesting. But be it as it may, we did not have a problem with the printing at all. Okay, so let me go back to this tractate Gittin, and because this is another one that there are so many stories to tell about. And this is the thing. The different tractates of the Talmud, for example, of this one that we are talking about, there are just fragments. As you can see, one of these pages is ripped. It's part of it. So these books, many of them exist only in fragments, pieces and bits, incomplete pages and things like that. And that's the case. There are only basically 13 pages left of this issue of the Talmud. 13 pages. It's not even a complete Masechet, a complete volume. So, but that's what is left. And in general, if you just have pages that are like this page that we have here in the middle, you don't know where this comes from. So for a long time, there was a knowledge that there was Hebrew printing of the Talmud in the Iberian Peninsula in the olden times, meaning before the expulsions and mass conversions. We knew that, and I'll tell you why in a second, but we didn't know where this was printed, where the printing was for. So we didn't know that it was from Faro. Now, first of all, why do we know that this is early Sephardic printing? We know because aside from the Talmud that you have these in big letters, you only have the Rashi commentary. There is no Tosfot commentary here. Now you have the Rashi and Tosfot and lots of other commentaries. But in the Iberian Peninsula, the early Sephardim did not study Tosfot. They only studied Rashi. So while, for example, the printings of the Talmud in Italy, even from early times, they have the Rashi commentary, but also the Tosfot commentary. The Tosfot, incidentally, are just basically two generations or three of descendants of Rashi that elaborate on these commentaries. There was nothing like that. It was just Rashi. Not only that, but in most cases in the Iberian Peninsula, when we have the Rashi commentary, it was not necessarily written in Rashi's script. It was written with block script as well. So there were things that were telltales about the fact that this book was written, it was printed in the Iberian Peninsula, but you didn't know where, and you didn't know when. Until we found out. Okay, how did we find out? This is one, again, another of those fascinating stories. This copy, okay, there, everything started in the year 1908, in the University of Leiden in the Netherlands, of all the places. University of Leiden in the Netherlands. The experts there, they have a great library, and incidentally, Leiden in the Netherlands, a very famous area in terms of religious tolerance, mostly Protestant, but also Jewish. Anyway, so Leiden, in their library, they had a big collection of books that were donated by a Dutch diplomat that was a diplomat to the Ottoman Empire during the 1600s, and he collected lots of books and he donated the books to the University of Leiden. So far, so good. Okay. So what happened in 1908 is that one of the specific books that he had donated needed to be renovated. Okay. This book that needed to be renovated was a printing in the Italian city of Sabbioneta from 1557. It was a book named Ateret Zekenim, the Crown of the Elders. And this is one of the books, one of the first books that Rabbi Don Itzhak Abravanel wrote. Don Itzhak Abravanel, the great sage from Portugal and Spain, late 1400s. Ateret Zekenim, this is a book that he wrote in Lisbon specifically. Of course, was only published 60 or 70 years after in Sabbioneta. Okay, so far so good. This is the book from Rabbi Abravanel from Portugal that was printed in Sabbioneta and is now in Leiden in 1908. They want to restore the cover of the book. Okay, now, how were the covers of the books done in the olden times, in those times? They did not do covers of the books as we do today. What they did at the time, they used for the covers pages that have been printed before or spare pieces of the paper that was left over from printing. And they use paste on that, and you eventually get with something that's a hardcover. But the hardcover was made of a paste of different printed pages. Now, one of the things that is one of the most dramatic and at the same time incredible thing is that because Hebrew printing was of very high quality, the books that were stolen from the Jews around this time were massively used and reused as binding materials. So now, this is bad news, right? Yes, it's also good news. Because as of now, just throughout the last century, we have 15,000 pieces of books that were used as covers for other books, non-Jewish books in particular, but also Jewish books. And this is actually called the European Geniza, the Cairo Geniza that we found all the books. This is almost a Geniza, it's almost a repository of old Hebrew books. That's where we find so many books. So now, the idea of using this binding was that you want good paper and you want to use spare paper, paper that is not used anymore. So again, Hebrew from Hebrew books was very useful, very helpful. But the technique was also used by Jewish people. So the book Ateret Zkenim, when the book was printed in 1557, the cover that was put in this book was using Hebrew leftovers, if you want, manuscript, not manuscript, but printing leftovers. And now that in 1908, these experts are basically tearing down and putting apart, setting apart the whole cover of this book, what do they find? They find that the cover of this book is made of parts and pages of a Talmud volume that was produced in Faro. How do we know? Because serendipity of serendipities, one of the pages that was used, that is this page right here on the right. So this page has the colophon. This page happened to be the last page of the book, where it has the specifications that this book was printed in the city of Faro in the year, whatever the year was, 1491, and it was printed under the auspices of Rabbi Shmuel Portero. So it spills the beans, has all the information there. And the other thing that is even more incredible is that some of these pages, there were a total of 13 pages that were found. But not only, this was a complete page, but there were half pages and things like that were found. And among these, there were 3 or 4 duplicates. This is absolutely important because this means that these, in 1557, these were papers that were leftovers from printings in Portugal in the 1490s. So there were printings 60 years before that were taken by the refugees. This was not an original book that was set apart. It would never be set apart pulled apart by the Jewish printers, but it was not. This was spare paper, leftover paper that was not used. So there was somebody from Faro in 1490s that the family some way somehow made it to Italy, and some way somehow they had this paper that was used in Sabioneta at that time. Again, absolutely fascinating story. And look, it's even more fascinating, not only because who would expect to find the provenance of this book this way, but also that the Faro Talmud was used in the cover of a book of one of the major Iberian rabbis of the time, Don Abravanel, with a book that was actually written in Lisbon. So it's mind-boggling if you want to think about it that way. Now, because I don't have a lot of time left, I want just to give you a sense of some of the other books and tell you a couple of other stories. So I'm going to advance a little bit. So far, we only talked about the first printing shop in Faro. There was another printing shop that was created in Lisbon. This was actually a larger printing shop. And the first book that was published was the commentary on the Torah by Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachum. And so the Ramban with the N at end, and that was in 1489. And this was actually the second book printed in Portugal. So the first and second books printed in Portugal were Hebrew books. Then there is Sefer Abu Dharam. This is a book on prayers. This is a book that illustrates and explains and discusses prayers. It's a classic to this day. And this is very important because this is the first time that this book was published in the world. So it's a issue Princeps, as it's called in this thing. It's the first time the book was published. As a matter of fact, I should tell you that all the books printed in Portugal, there were 11 books that were first world editions. First 11, there were 11 texts that were edition Princeps. So the Sefer Abu Dharam has this this characteristic of being a fundamental book in terms of prayers, explaining the prayers. Then you have a prayer book, and this is an incredibly rare event to find a prayer book. Get more on that in a moment. The Lisbon Pentateuch is a classic. It's considered the most beautiful incunabula ever written, ever typed, ever printed. It's gorgeous. I'll show you a picture in a little bit. And then there were some others that we don't need to talk too much about. The printing of Isaiah and Jeremiah, the book of Proverbs, and the Ilchot Shchita on the laws of ritual slaughter by Maimonides. But let me tell you a little bit about some of these books. It's worth mentioning. Okay, so this is the cover. On your left, you have the cover of the first page of the Hiddushei Torah, that is of Nachmanides, the commentary on the Torah by Nachmanides. And as you can see, it has a beautiful, beautiful decoration. It has a beautiful frame. And the letters, the first letters of the different books are also decorative letters. Now, we literally could spend the next hour talking about this, because this is one of the most moving findings of all this research. Because these frame that you see here, and please keep in mind that all the frames and all the typographic equipment was built on purpose, meaning it was unique. You don't have two frames that are the same. You cannot do that. You have one frame. So this is very unique because this frame have been used in Spain, in the Hijjar printing house. All these block letters, all these decorative letters were used in Hijjar before. So that means that the people that set up the printing shop in Lisbon came from Spain, came from Hijjar. Actually, the conjecture is that the Rabbi Eliezer from the printing shop in Lisbon is the same as the Rabbi Eliezer from the printing shop in Hijjar in Spain. Okay, so these have been used in Spain. It's used now. Now, if you just go a little bit, I'm showing you another book. This is the second book printed in Lisbon. This is the Sefer Abu Dharam. This is the commentary on the Tefillot, on the prayers. Look, again, the same frame. But that's not all. This frame was used in Hijjar first, in Spain, in Lisbon twice, last time 1492. By the year 1500, it was being used by Iberian printers in Constantinople, in the Ottoman Empire. It was used maybe in 10 different books in Constantinople. And in 1515 was used in North Africa, in the city of Fez, exactly the same frame, to produce the first book ever printed in Africa. That was a Hebrew book, which was another edition of the Sefer Abu Dharam that was printed with equipment coming from Lisbon. So the equipment from Lisbon ended up making it to Constantinople, and then part of it making it to Fez. And I say part of it because the way they organized the printings reflected that they did not have a lot of mobile characters. There were missing some equipment. But the point is that you can see the equipment that is taken from Lisbon, and then it's taken to Constantinople, and then part of it is taken to North Africa to Fez. Now, guess what? This equipment actually comes from Ijar from Spain. You can almost trace, no, it's not almost, you can trace where these people went, where these printers went, where the people went. We know that the printers from Lisbon went to Constantinople. Others went to Salonika, also in the Ottoman Empire. We know them by name. It's Rabbi Yehuda Gdalia went to Salonika. Rabbi Shmuel Notivot, he went to Fez. We know these are people that worked in Lisbon and took part of the equipment around with them. Now, get ready, because the thing that is the most fascinating thing about this frame is that this frame was designed and produced by a Spanish non-Jewish artist of his name Fernandez. And there is some conjecture that maybe he was a converse or not. I'm not sure. I don't think he was, but whatever. So Alfredo Fernandez, he designed these. And this same frame that is used in all these things is also used in Spain, in Salamanca, in a Catholic prayer book. In a Catholic prayer book. So it's exactly the same frame, meaning the guy did these frames and all these decorative things, and he basically just used to print this prayer book and then for the Jewish population at all. It was not an issue. This was a very neutral piece of decoration. And as a matter of fact, the experts tell us that the piece of decoration, recycling these pieces of decoration was a normal thing at the time, from one book to the next. But what was unique about this is that if you analyze what the decoration is, it fits very well into the biblical narrative. It does not fit at all into a Catholic prayer book. So it was designed having in mind, because basically the design is for the first commissioner, and then after that it's whatever it is. So in Spain, it was used for the first time in Hijar, in a part of the Torah that is the Song of the Sea, the Az Yeshif Moshe, 2 pages with the Song of the Sea that Moses sang when we're next to the Red Sea, and the 2 pages have these pieces of decoration.
Well, I'm going to have to cut you off because I know people have to leave, and I encourage
Yes.
people to continue. And besides looking at the book, there's also a speaking tour going on. So I hope Rabbi Pereira will share with us where he will be continuing this conversation, because we know Rabbi Pereira never says the same talk twice.
No.
And so it'll be very interesting.
But that's mostly because I don't remember what I said last time.
No.
Yeah. So, Drora, let me, if
Close
you
it
give
off,
me the
of
right,
course.
just to finish.
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm going to cut everything else, but I just want to tell you about this page here. This is a prayer book that was printed in Lisbon around 1490. This is very unique. Okay. We have very, very few prayer books that were left from this time period, printed prayer books in particular. And there is a reason for that. Part of the reason is that prayer books were used on a daily basis, so were much more used than all the other books, and therefore there is a tear and wear. It's normal. But there is another reason that is less nice, which is that while other books that were commentaries and even the Talmud and things like that, there was a whole world called the Hebraists. The Hebraists were Christian clergy that were very interested in learning the Hebrew stuff. I mean, for their own purposes, mind you, but so they were academics, the Hebraists. So they saved all of that. Many books of those, many books that survived were actually in the possession of these people because they wrote their names in the books as well. But prayer books, they didn't have any use for prayer books. Prayer books were irrelevant, so they didn't save it. Prayer books were prime targets for destruction. Because again, there was no use for them from an intellectual perspective. So it's very unique. It's very unique that this prayer book survived. It's not complete, but almost. It's a prayer book for the whole year, including Shabbat, including high holidays. It's a book that even, for example, for the holiday of Sukkot, it has detailed explanations on how to shake the lulav and etrog. For Rosh Hashanah, has detailed explanations on how to blow the shofar with some notes and cantillation. And one of the things that I want to tell you is when you look at these books, when you look at this prayer book, for all practical purposes, this is a prayer book that we could be using now. It's over 500 years old, but we could be using it now. Now, of course, there are differences. And I have here, right here on the left, on purpose, that this is the Arvit Shel Shabbat, is the Friday evening service. The Friday evening service, as you can see, starts with Bameh Madlikim. It's a part of the Mishnah Shabbat, which is what most people, aside from Sephardim and Chabad, use to start the evening service. But there is a whole Kabbalat Shabbat service before. There is no such a thing here. Because the Kabbalat Shabbat service was only introduced in the 1580s by the refugees that settled in Tzfat. So at this time, 1491, the service for Friday evening started with Bameh Madlikim. Once you start, you went straight into the service. But the thing for me is look at this prayer book, and if you don't feel anything when you look at the prayer book and see this is the same prayers we have now, I mean, this is incredibly moving. It's incredibly moving. This is, how do we dare to change and say that the prayers are obsolete and whatever? I mean, when you pray now using these words, you're just connecting with Jews all over the world, but you're connecting with Jews throughout time. Imagine the enormous sense of awe that comes with that. So, very unique prayer book. Half of it, of the prayer book, is in the National Library of Israel. The other half is in the Jewish Theological Seminary in the United States, in New York, which incidentally has an incredible collection of these type of books. So with all of these, I go straight to the very end and just tell you that in my mind, that all of these books that Iberian Jews left, these are their monuments, because if you go throughout the Iberian Peninsula, unfortunately, you don't find a lot of monuments. You don't find a lot of Jewish monuments. You find some in Spain because, well, we were lucky enough in Spain that they were not destroyed. They were confiscated by the church and transformed into whatever. So, but for example, if you go to Portugal, you basically don't see any monuments, any Jewish monuments at all. You have a couple of things very vaguely here and there. And of course, that was destruction, wanton destruction, but also several earthquakes that ravaged everything. So you don't have that. So what are the monuments that we have from these people that talk to us directly, that you can almost see them, almost touch them? These are the monuments of paper and parchment. These are the monuments that show us who the people were and the stories behind the people. And I'll leave you with a sad fact. There are about, we didn't talk about manuscripts, we talked about printed books. But for example, manuscripts, there are about 60 manuscripts that were written in Portugal, but you know for sure written in Portugal between the 1200s and 1496. 60. Not one of them is in Portugal. Not one. It's all over the world. What does that tell you about Portuguese and Spanish Jewry? The incunabula that I'm talking about, the overwhelming majority of the incunabula that survived from this period is not in Portugal. It's in other places. Moreover, the ones that are in Portugal, the very few that are in Portugal, were acquired recently. And by recently, I mean within the last 150 years or so. This tells you there is a diaspora of the books. There is a diaspora of the books that follow people. You can see the people in the books where they go at the same time. So these are not just books. These are testimony to a very difficult period where, on one hand, there was a lot of suffering. On the other hand, there is a lot of creativity and a lot of incredible contributions. And that's where I would stop.
Thank you. And like I said before, there is so much more here. And we look forward to continuing it. And I do hope that you'll share with us your list of speaking engagements so we can share them around as well. And I'll add it to the website if that helps. And,
Sure. Sure.
Thank you again. I do encourage
Okay.
everybody. It's a beautiful volume as well. I'm just letting you know. Like, it's not only intensely full of information, but it physically is a beautiful volume with a lot of not illustrations, but manuscripts, or they're not manuscripts. Photos of the books.
Lots of images.
Images.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a good word. Thanks for the English help.
Yep. Very good. And for those who may want to get the book, again, don't if you order it through me, I will be more than happy to offer 25% discount and free shipping and handling. So you just need to say that it's through the Jewish Unity through Diversity network that you get it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you, Torah. Thank you, Rabbi. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.